The triage tent smelled like antiseptic and burned wire, and the particular kind of damp that settles into canvas when it hasn't been dry in 3 weeks. Dr. Ethan Marsh didn't notice any more. After 14 months at Relay Station Kappa 7, a humanitarian field post wedged into the contested strip between the Dorath corridor and the outer resettlement belt, a man stopped noticing things like smell. He noticed other things instead. He noticed how the light changed when the generator cycled down. He noticed which of the local aid workers had started rubbing their temples before they opened their supply manifests. He noticed always which cots were filled and which were empty, and he kept a quiet, private accounting of both. Tonight the tent held 9. 2 Dorath refugees with inhalation injuries from the shelling 2 systems over. A Veth male with a leg infection that had gone a week too long before anyone brought him in. 3 children human, all 3, from the settler convoy that had stalled outside the corridor, with the dull eyes and distended middles that meant malnutrition catching up to them faster than calories could be delivered. And 1 patient Ethan had not yet made it to, because Nurse Rolla had been managing her since the intake desk flagged her case as complicated, and Rolla never used that word lightly. He finished redressing the Veth man's leg, a clean wrap, 2 more days of antibiotics, firm instructions about keeping it elevated that the man would ignore, and crossed the tent to the partition curtain at the far end. "Marsh," Rolla said softly from the other side, holding the curtain edge without pulling it back. She was Dorath herself, gray-green skin, wide amber eyes that could read a room before she'd fully entered it. 14 months at this post, and Ethan had never once seen her flustered. She was as close to flustered as he'd ever seen her now. "What are we dealing with?" he asked. "She came in with the corridor transit group, the ones who walked in this afternoon." Rolla kept her voice low. "She was at the back. Didn't come to the intake window. One of the volunteers noticed her sitting outside the fence, not moving for almost an hour. Brought her in. Injuries. Malnourished, some lacerations on her hands and forearms, old, mostly healed but not clean. No fever. Vitals are low normal." Rolla paused. "She's Velsethara." Ethan processed that. The Velsethara were from the Sethara cluster, 3 planets in the far eastern reach of the corridor, all 3 of them caught in the Dorath-Kethani border dispute for going on 6 years. He'd treated maybe a dozen of them in the past year. They were a tall people, pale-skinned in shades that ran from cream to silver gray, with dark markings almost like ink, but biological, shifting faintly with emotion, that traced from their temples down their jawlines and throat. Highly empathic species. Highly, he was choosing a careful word, fragile in the way that empathic people were fragile when their world had been very loud for very long. "Okay," he said. "She doesn't want to be touched," Rolla said. "She let me check her pulse and her temperature, but when I went to look at the lacerations it took a while." Rolla's jaw tightened fractionally, which was the Rolla equivalent of saying it was genuinely bad. "She keeps apologizing." "For what?" "For being here, for taking up space." Rolla met his eyes steadily. "For existing in a way that inconvenienced anyone." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I'll go in," he said. She was sitting on the edge of the cot, not lying down, in the way people sat when they didn't believe they'd earned the right to take up horizontal space. Her hands were in her lap, palms up, and she was looking at them with an expression that Ethan had learned over time to recognize as the look of someone who'd been doing an audit of themselves and had come up short. She was tall even seated. He could tell she'd have several inches on him, with the silver-pale skin of a Velsethara and the dark markings he'd expected. They ran from her temples to her jaw in a branching pattern, like frost on glass, and they were currently a flat, dull gray that should have been luminous, that would have been luminous on someone who was well and whole, and not sitting on a relief post cot trying to take up as little space as possible. Her hair was dark and had been cut, not cut. He corrected himself, looking at the uneven edges, shorn, some time ago, probably not by her own choice. It had grown out some since, long enough to curl against her jaw on one side. Her eyes, when she registered his presence and looked up, were a pale, almost silver violet. The kind of eyes that would have been extraordinary under other circumstances and right now were simply exhausted. She looked at him for a moment, then immediately looked away. "I apologize," she said. Her basic was accented but fluent, careful. "I know I should not be here. I told the woman, the gray one, the kind one, I told her I didn't need a bed. I was going to move. I was just resting for a moment." She stopped herself. "I'm sorry, I'll go." She started to stand. "Please don't," Ethan said. He kept his voice at the register. He'd spent years calibrating for rooms like this one. Not soft in a way that felt patronizing, not neutral in a way that felt clinical. Just steady. Like the thing most likely to be true was that she could stay. "I'm Dr. Marsh. I'm not here to ask you to leave. I'm here because I'd like to help if I can." She stayed at the edge of the cot, halfway between sitting and standing, deciding. He waited. This was the thing they didn't really teach in medical school, the waiting. The willingness to hold a space open and let someone step into it in their own time. You either learned it or you didn't, and the ones who didn't tended to apply for transfers to the core systems after 6 months. After a long moment, she sat back down. "I don't want to take resources," she said. "There are people here who need them more." "That's for me to decide," Ethan said. "And I've decided that you're a patient who needs attention." He moved slowly to the stool beside the cot, never standing over someone if he could sit at their level, and settled onto it. "Can you tell me your name?" She looked at her hands again. The dark markings at her jaw shifted, just barely, toward something darker. "Sarayvath," she said after a moment. "Sarayvath Velki." "Sarayvath," he said. Not "that's a nice name," which he'd heard people say and which always felt like reaching. Just her name, repeated back like it was real and he'd registered it. "How long were you walking?" A flicker of something across her face, surprise maybe, that he'd asked that first and not something else. 11 days from the corridor way station. 11 days. The way station was 90 kilometers out. He didn't say the math out loud. "On foot?" he asked instead. "For most of it." She glanced up briefly, then back down. "There was a transport for 2 days. Then it was not safe to stay with the transport, so I walked." He nodded. "Are you hungry right now?" The question seemed to catch her off guard in a different way. Like she'd braced for a form to fill out, and instead someone had offered her something very basic that she'd forgotten to need. She stopped. "I don't want to use." "I have field ration packs here," Ethan said. "They have a 6-month shelf life and we're 3 weeks from a resupply. Eating one won't deprive anyone of anything." He reached for the small cabinet at the head of the cot and produced a gray packet. "This one's mild. The Velsithara digestion profile I have on record says low capsaicin and neutral proteins work well. Is that right for you?" She looked at the packet. Her throat moved. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's yes." He set it on the cot beside her and did not watch her eat. He turned instead to his tablet, pulling up a basic intake record, giving her the privacy of not being observed while she was hungry. After a moment, he heard the seal break. He kept the questions light while she ate. When had she last slept? She said 3 days, not counting short rests against trees or rocks. Where was she headed? She said she didn't know, which was not unusual, and he didn't push it. He checked the lacerations on her hands. She let him, though she held herself so still when he was close that it was like treating someone who had made themselves into furniture. The wounds were old, as Rolla had said. Several months old. The skin had healed in thin, slightly raised lines, not quite the natural color of her silver-pale skin. He didn't ask how she'd gotten them, not yet. He cleaned them anyway, more because the ritual of it was useful than because they needed it, and he noticed that the markings along her jaw had shifted, not to a better color, but a more present one, as if some layer of flatness had eased slightly. "Thank you," she said, when he recapped the antiseptic. "Of course. You don't have to be," she stopped. "Kind," he said, without looking up from the cabinet where he was returning the supplies. "Silence." He turned back to her. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, but the markings had gone very still. "Most of the camps," she said carefully, "the people are not unkind, but they have much to do. They are very busy with people who have real injuries, real needs." She looked at her hands again. "I know that I am not," she stopped again, and this time the stop was harder, like she was pressing down on something that wanted to get out. "I am not a high-priority case." "You walked 90 kilometers in 11 days on malnutrition reserves," Ethan said. "Your hands have healed badly from something that should have been treated and wasn't. You have been awake for 3 days. You need food and rest and probably at least a week of proper nutrition before your baseline stabilizes." He paused. "That's a high-priority case." She looked up at him. He held her gaze steadily, so she would know he meant it. "I don't," her voice was quieter now, and it cracked at the edges in a way that she immediately tried to smooth over. "I don't understand why you're saying that." "Because it's true. There are Dorath children in this tent." "Yes, I treated them an hour ago. They're stable." He set his tablet down on the stool beside him. "The fact that other people need care doesn't mean you don't." She looked at him for a long time. The markings along her jaw had gone very dark, very still, and he recognized. Because he'd looked up Velsethara physiological responses when the first one had come through the post. That dark and still in the markings meant something was being contained that the body was working hard to contain. "I have not been very useful," she said finally, like she was confessing something she'd been carrying for a long time. "Since I have not been useful, I have not been able to work consistently. I have not been able to stay in one place long enough to establish I had a function before the campaign in the third system. I worked in civic records. I was good at it." A pause. "I am not good at much now." "I am not," she stopped, and this time the stop was complete and she lowered her face, and when she spoke again it was almost to herself, barely audible. "I'm scared. I'm worthless. I know that. I know what I am. I just needed one night." Her shoulders had drawn in. "I just needed one night where I was warm." The tent was quiet. Outside the generator hummed. Someone coughed once in the main section. Ethan sat with what she'd said. He didn't rush to deny it. He didn't immediately say "you're not worthless" in the bright, reflexive way that was technically kind and almost never actually reached anyone. He sat with it for a moment in the way that said "I heard you," rather than "I will now fix you." Then he said "Saravath." She looked up. "The person who built those civic records," he said. "Who was good at it? Who knew that function and did it well? Is that person gone, or is that person tired?" She stared at him. He waited. "Tired," she said finally, and her voice was so thin it was almost nothing. "I think tired." "Okay," he said, "then rest." She slept for 11 hours. He checked on her twice during the night, each time just inside the curtain, not approaching the cot unless needed. The second time, around 300, the markings along her jaw had shifted in her sleep, not dark and contained, but something more diffuse, spreading faintly down her throat in the pale luminous way that his notes said corresponded to the Velsethara equivalent of deep, undefended sleep. The kind where the body finally believed, at some level below conscious thought, that it was safe. He had Rolla update the notes and went back to the main section. When she woke, Ethan was doing paperwork at the desk near the tent entrance, a portable tablet in one hand, a mug of something that had been coffee 3 hours ago and was now cold, which he drank anyway because waste was not something he could afford philosophically at this post. Saravath appeared at the edge of the curtain, still in the aid post blanket she'd been issued, which was 3 sizes too small for her, and which she'd wrapped around herself anyway like a person who knew better than to complain about the size of things that were free. "I should go," she said. "Sit down and have breakfast first," Ethan said, without looking up from the tablet. A pause. "Dr. Marsh." "There's a table," he said, and nodded toward the small folding surface near the back wall where the field ration cabinet was. "And there are more packs, and there's something that was coffee at some point this morning. Rolla made it. It's better than mine. Please eat before you go anywhere." Another pause. Longer. She sat down. He let the silence settle into something comfortable, or at least not uncomfortable, while she opened a ration pack, and he finished the supply projection he'd been working on. After several minutes, he set the tablet down and refilled his mug from the carafe and carried one to her table and sat across from it. "Do you know where you're going?" he asked. She looked at the ration pack. "There is a resettlement intake process at the Kael'veth hub. I was told there are spaces for Velsethara nationals. I thought," she shrugged slightly, "I thought I would try." "That's a solid plan," he said. "The Kael'veth hub opened a Velsethara track 8 months ago. I've had a few patients pass through and get placed." He paused. "It's 2 days transit on the corridor line from the way station if you get a berth. I have some credits left." "You shouldn't need them for the berth. The transit authority has a refugee rate for confirmed corridor transit cases." He pulled a small laminated card from the organizer on the table. He kept a supply of them, reference cards for exactly this, because it came up 3 or 4 times a month, and slid it across. "Show them this code at the window. It covers basic passage." She looked at the card for a moment. Then she picked it up with the same careful quality she'd applied to everything else, like things that were offered to her might be withdrawn if she wasn't careful enough. "You just have those," she said. "You just keep them there. People pass through," he said. "They need things." She was quiet for a moment. "Why do you do this?" she asked, not accusatory. Genuinely puzzled, in the way of someone who had been asking themselves the question and couldn't arrive at an answer from the outside. Ethan considered. He'd been asked variations of this question many times, from aid volunteers burning out, from family back home who didn't understand the posting, from patients who couldn't reconcile what he was doing with their prior experience of what people did. He had different answers for different askers. "I'm good at it," he said, "and the places I'm good at it happen to be the places where it's needed." She studied him. "That's not the whole answer," she said. He looked at her. The markings at her jaw were no longer flat. They had the quality of attention, of someone who was present in the room rather than merely occupying it. "No," he agreed, "but it's a true part of it." She seemed to accept that. She finished her ration pack in silence. Then she folded the wrapper with more precision than it required, like she was putting something in order, and set it on the table. She started. "I said things last night when I was tired." A pause. "I am embarrassed." "Don't be," he said simply. "I am not usually," she stopped. "I don't usually say those things to people." "You were honest," he said. "That's not something to be embarrassed about." "What I said was," she looked down. "It wasn't, I don't know if it's true, what I said about being worthless. I don't know if I actually believe it or if I said it because." She stopped again, and her jaw tightened, and the markings went through a quick, complex shift that his notes told him he probably couldn't read accurately. "Because it felt like the only true thing," he said quietly. She looked up. "I've treated a lot of people who have been through hard corridors," he said. "Not the same hard, different kinds of loss, but I've heard that sentence or something like it a lot, and I've never once heard it from someone who was actually worthless." He said it evenly, without force, because force was not the same as truth. It's the kind of thing that starts to sound true when you've been carrying too much for too long. It's not a diagnosis. It's fatigue talking. She was very still. "You don't know me," she said. "You don't know what I did or didn't do." "No," he said, "I don't." He didn't ask. The offer of the space, the offer of the sentence left open rather than filled, was deliberate. If she wanted to tell him, she could. She looked at him for a long time. Then she told him. The third planet of the Sethara cluster had not fallen quickly. It had fallen slowly in the way that was sometimes worse. The administration eroded first, and then the civic infrastructure, and then the ability to move resources, and finally the ability to move people. Sarevith had been a records keeper, not a high post, but a central one, because central posts were not always the highest ones. She had known where people were. She had known which families had registered, and which had not, and where the unregistered lived, and the unregistered were the ones the aid convoys most often missed. She had tried to route the information to the convoys. For a while, it had worked. Then the administration had been replaced by an interim authority that had different priorities, and the interim authority had not wanted the information routed the way she was routing it, and she had continued anyway for 3 months after she'd been told to stop. She told this without drama, looking at the table, in the flat way of someone who had already processed the dramatic version and was now just carrying the facts. The lacerations on her hands, she said at some point, were from when they'd taken her from her office. She'd caught the edge of something on the way out. She said it the way you said I tripped on a step, the stripped-down version, the version that fit in a sentence. She had been held for 6 weeks, then moved to a transit facility, then released into the corridor movement with the others who had nowhere specific to go. When she finished, she didn't look up immediately. So she said to the table, "That is what I am, what I was." She paused. "I don't have my records anymore. I don't have any proof. I don't know if what I did reached anyone. I don't know if the information I passed meant that anyone lived who would not have otherwise. I don't know." Her voice had gone quiet and precise, the voice of a person trying to be very accurate. "That is what I meant when I said worthless. I meant, I don't know what my value was. I don't know what I have to offer now. I know that I used to have a function and I don't know if I have one anymore, and I'm—" She stopped. "Scared," he said. She looked up. "You said it last night," he said. "I heard it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said after a moment, "just that, yes." "That," he said carefully, "is the most honest thing a person can say, and I mean that without any diminishment of it. It doesn't mean you're finished. It means you're telling the truth about where you are right now." He paused. "And where you are right now is, you passed information that probably saved people even if you can't prove it. You continued doing that after you were told not to, which is the category of choice that is either a mistake or integrity, and I think you know which one it was. You walked 90 kilometers. You're sitting across from me, eating breakfast, making a plan to go to the Kaelveth hub." He said all of this at the same calm register, the way he might read findings from a chart. That's not the profile of a worthless person. That's the profile of a person who's been through something very heavy and is still here. She was very still again. The markings along her jaw, he watched them, shifted, gradually, from the dark contained quality of the night before toward something that ran lighter and warmer, tracing the branching pattern toward her throat with the faint luminescence that he now knew, from his notes, indicated emotional exposure. Not distress. Something more like being seen. "You don't," she stopped herself, started again. "How do you—" Another stop. He waited. "No one has said that to me," she said finally. "In, I don't know how long, no one has said something like that as though they believed it." "I do believe it," he said. "You've known me for 12 hours. I have good diagnostic instincts," he said, and meant it precisely the way it sounded. A beat passed. And then, the first time since she'd arrived, Sarevith's face shifted in a way that wasn't containment or careful precision or the management of pain. It was small and brief, and didn't reach a full smile, but it was something in the category of a smile. A shift at the corners of her mouth that suggested some part of her recognized the absurdity and the kindness as being present in the same sentence. The markings brightened briefly. "I don't understand you," she said, not as a complaint, more as the beginning of a theory she hadn't yet developed. "Most people don't," he said, which was not entirely true but was true enough. "Eat the rest of that pack. You'll need the protein." He had rounds. She rested. The tent filled and emptied in its usual rhythm. 2 new patients in the morning, 1 discharged by midday. The 3 children graduated from the acute section to the general recovery area with better eyes and some color returning to their faces. Ethan came back at midday with another ration pack and a thermos of actual hot coffee, not from the morning carafe, but from the reserve tin he kept for surgical days and other situations that warranted it, and found Saravith at the folding table, not sleeping, but sitting with a posture that was different from the night before. Not folded inward, but upright, her hands on the table's surface, looking at the tent wall with an expression that was somewhere between thinking and deciding. She looked at him when he came in. "Thank you," she said, when he set the thermos on the table. "I want to ask you something," he said, sitting down. "You don't have to answer." She waited. "Civic records work," he said. "Data routing, intake systems, population tracking for aid distribution. Is that still something you know how to do?" She looked at him carefully. "Yes," she said. "That is, yes, I know how to do that." "We have a gap here," he said. "We've had a gap for about 3 months. Our data coordinator went to the core systems for a family situation, and we haven't had anyone since. Right now Rolla is doing the tracking manually, which is—" he paused. "Rolla is extraordinary, but manual tracking for a 9-bed rotating field post is not what she should be spending her time on." He turned the thermos in his hands. "I'm not offering you this because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering it because it's a real gap and you have a real skill that fills it." Saravith was quiet for a long moment. "I don't have credentials anymore," she said. "I don't have the interim authority revoked." "I don't care about the interim authority's paperwork," Ethan said. "I need someone who can build a functioning intake and resource allocation system for a field post in the Dorath corridor. Can you do that?" A pause. "Yes," she said, "I can do that. The posting is 6 months. It comes with full humanitarian worker status, which gets you a legal residence designation and fast-tracks you for the Kael'Veth resettlement track significantly." He set the thermos down. "You'd have a station ID by the end of the week." She looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" she said again. The same question from the morning, but with a different weight to it. "Because," he said, "someone who routed aid information in a collapsing system for 3 months after she was told to stop is exactly the kind of person I want managing the data for this post." She held his gaze. The markings along her jaw were very bright. She stopped, collected herself in the precise way she had. "I would like to accept that," she said, "if you're certain." "I'm certain," he said. The first week was the orientation of all the ways. The post's data system was broken. Ethan gave her access to the intake terminal and the supply manifests and the historical records going back to the post's opening. And by the end of the second day, she had filled 2 pages of a legal pad with notes in her own script. Small, dense, the handwriting of a person who had spent years putting a lot of information into compact spaces. And her expression had shifted from careful to focused in a way that suggested a different kind of person was showing up. He left her to it. That was important. Not hovering, not checking in too often, not making her feel supervised in the way that would have communicated, even accidentally, that he wasn't sure she could manage. He'd hired her. He treated the hire like he meant it. On the first morning, she'd had questions about the terminal interface, a corridor-specific variant that was different from what she'd used on Velsethara, and she'd asked them with the precise, structured quality of someone who'd spent years asking exactly the questions needed and no others. He answered them the same way. By midday, she was navigating the interface without asking, and by late afternoon she had found a discrepancy in the intake triage records that none of them had noticed. "The categorization for secondary respiratory cases," she said, bringing her legal pad to where he was seated. She held it angled so he could see the notation. "They're being filed under general respiratory, which means they're not triggering the follow-up flag. But secondary cases in a dust-heavy environment," she paused. "They're not the same thing. They need a different follow-up interval." He looked at the notation. It was exactly correct. "You caught that on day 1, he said. "I was reading the historical records." She said it neutrally, not modestly and not with pride, just as the explanation of where the information had come from. "I can fix the categorization flag this afternoon if you want." "Please do," he said. She nodded and went back to the terminal. He stayed where he was for a moment, looking at the empty doorway she'd moved through, and felt something settle in him that he recognized as not quite what he'd expected, but better. He'd hired her because the gap was real and her skill was real. He hadn't hired her expecting this. Rolla found him near the generator shed on the afternoon of day 3. "She restructured the intake categorization system," Rolla said. "Is that good?" "She did it in 2 days. I've been meaning to do it for 8 months. Rolla's amber eyes were measuring him in the way they measured things. "She's good." "I know," he said. "She flagged 3 resource allocation errors from the previous quarter that cost us almost 4 weeks of supply advance." Rolla paused. "She said it was a common problem in corridor-adjacent posts, and gave me 3 references for how other sites had corrected it." "Did she?" "She also," Rolla said, "reorganized the pediatric intake records and cross-referenced them with the Transit Authority's family registration database, and identified 11 unregistered children in the current wave who should qualify for family reunion tracking." A pause. "In case you were wondering what you hired." Ethan looked at the generator shed wall. "I was," he said. Rolla studied him with the amber-eyed acuity. That was simply how she looked at things. "She's not sleeping enough," Rolla said on day 6, not accusatorially, just as information. "I know, I told her." "You told her to sleep." She listened and then reorganized the pediatric records until 1:30. Rolla paused. "She's not doing it because she doesn't want to sleep. She's doing it because when she stops working she has to be somewhere, and she doesn't know where to be yet." He looked at Rolla. "Give her time," Rolla said. "I know," he said, "I am." Rolla looked at him a moment longer. "She asked me this morning how long you've been here," she said. "I told her 14 months. She asked what made someone stay that long." A pause. "I told her she should ask you." He didn't ask Saravith if she had. She didn't bring it up. But he noticed in the days after that she watched him in the occasional, sidelong way of someone forming a hypothesis, not studying him exactly, just noticing things and filing them, which, given what she did for a living, was probably the most natural thing in the world for her. In the second week, one of the transit group patients, a Doreth elder with a compression fracture and opinions about how his care was being managed, challenged Saravith's authority to access his file. He did it loudly, and he did it using language that Ethan, coming through the entrance, only caught the tail end of, but that Rolla later described to him in flat, precise terms that made him set down whatever he was holding. Saravith, Rolla said, had not raised her voice. She had told the patient calmly that the records were medical records and that her access was authorized by the post administrator, and that she was doing her job. She had then, still calmly, walked to the far end of the tent, stood very still for approximately 90 seconds, and returned to the terminal. "Was she upset?" Ethan asked. "Yes," Rolla said, "but she handled it." He went to the terminal at the end of the day, not making a production of it, just stopping as he passed. "I heard about the patient," he said. Saravith looked up from the terminal. Her markings were the contained, flat color, but she was composed. It was not serious. He was in pain and he was frightened. People say things. He had no right. I know, she said. I know that now. She looked at the terminal briefly. There was a time when I would have believed him, a little. I can tell the difference now between someone being wrong about me and someone being right about me. She paused. That took a long time. Good, he said. He didn't make more of it than that because she wasn't asking him to. The reconciliation looks right, by the way. I know, she said, and turned back to the terminal. But the markings had brightened fractionally. She was at the desk when he came in late on a Thursday night. The intake desk, not the patient area, because she had made the intake desk her territory in the way that certain people made desks their territories, not aggressively, but with the quiet competence that meant the desk simply worked better with her at it. She was working by the light of the intake terminal, the blue glow of it on her silver-pale face and the dark markings that had, over the past several weeks, returned to the luminous quality that his notes had described as their natural state. They shifted when she worked, not dramatically, but in small ways, a brightening at the jaw that he'd come to associate with concentration, a slight warming near the temples when something complicated resolved cleanly. She looked up when he came in. You should be asleep, she said. I'm checking on the children, he said, and you should also be asleep. I wanted to finish the supply reconciliation. At midnight. The resupply comes at 600 and I wanted the reconciliation ready. She turned back to the terminal. I'll sleep when it's done. He went and checked on the children, all three of them sleeping well now, properly sleeping, with color in their faces and weight coming back, and on the other patients. And when he came back through, she was still at the desk, but the terminal screen had shifted to something quieter, a completed manifest sitting closed. Done, he asked. Done, she said. He pulled a chair from the wall and sat at the other end of the desk, because leaving felt oddly abrupt, and because this was the part of the nights at Kappa 7 that he'd found, over 14 months, to be the version of peace available at a field post. The low hum of the generator, the settled weight of a tent where people were being cared for, the specific quality of a room where the work had, for this moment, caught up with the need. My second week here, she said after a while, I found a family. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at the terminal screen, which was off. In the records, a mother and 2 children, Velsethara, which is why I was looking at that data set. They'd been registered at the corridor way station 11 months ago, and then the registration went cold. She turned the stylus in her hand. I cross-referenced with the Transit Authority database. There in the Kailveth hub, all 3 of them. They arrived 4 months ago. Ethan watched her. I didn't route that specific family, she said. I was in the Doreth subregion at the time. The way station is a different circuit, but someone did. Someone passed that information along. She set the stylus down. I don't know if that was ever going to matter to me. I didn't think it would, but I found them and I don't know. She paused. It mattered. Yeah, he said. It usually does. The markings along her jaw were very still, not the dark stillness of containment, but the luminous stillness that he'd come to understand was her equivalent of being at rest. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. That first night, she was choosing her words with care. When I said what I said, you didn't say it wasn't true. You didn't say, she stopped. Most people, when someone says a thing like that, they say, of course it isn't true, of course you're not. She glanced at him. You didn't do that. No, he said. Why? He thought about it. Because saying of course it isn't true asterisk is a quick answer. It's true, but it's quick. And quick answers for things like that, they go in one ear and they don't stay. They don't stay because the person saying it doesn't know you, and so it can't carry any weight. He turned the cold mug in his hands. I didn't know you either. I couldn't tell you it wasn't true. What I could do was ask you a question that let you look at the evidence yourself. She was watching him. Tired or gone, she said quietly. Tired or gone, he agreed. I've thought about that question every day since, she said. And tired, she said. The word was simple and complete and carried no caveat. Tired. He nodded. She looked back at the dark terminal. I was scared, she said. What I said that night, I meant it when I said it. I was scared, and I thought that the fear meant the other thing was true, that they went together. A pause. I'm still scared sometimes. I think that part won't go away quickly. She glanced at him. But I think I had the inference wrong. Fear and worthlessness, he said. They don't require each other, she said. I know that now. He looked at her, this person who had spent 6 weeks in a transit holding facility for the crime of routing information accurately, who had walked 90 kilometers on a malnourished body, who had sat in front of him in a blanket 2 sizes too small and apologized for existing, and who was now sitting at a desk at midnight with a completed supply reconciliation, and the particular expression of someone who had taken a thing apart and understood how it worked. No, he said. They don't. He asked her one afternoon during a quiet hour what the planet had looked like, Velsethara's third planet, the one she was from, not the fall of it, just the planet itself. She was quiet for a moment, the careful quiet of someone deciding whether the question was safe to answer. Then she answered. It had seasons, she said. 4 of them, which was unusual for a system that close to its star, something about the axial tilt and the binary influence of the 2 gas giants in the outer belt. The seasons were mild, none of them extreme, and the one she'd liked best was the long one the Velsethara called the *Eth-Salva, approximately. The quiet turning, the time when the light changed its angle and everything went briefly golden. The records building had a west-facing window on the upper floor, and in the Eth-Salva, the light through that window in the late afternoon was a specific color that she was not able to describe in basic and probably not in any language she shared with him. Try, he said. She considered. Like looking through amber, she said, but from the inside. A pause, warm in the way that warmth feels when you don't realize you've been cold. He was quiet. There were also markets, she said, more easily now, like the first sentence had opened something. In the city center. I went on rest days. I didn't usually buy anything. I just walked through. What did they sell? Food, mostly. The Velsethara cooked differently than the aid rations. Much differently. A small pause that might have been wry. The rations are functional. The food from the market was not functional exactly. It was made with attention. She looked at her hands on the terminal edge. I miss it. Eating something someone made with attention. I can cook, he said. She looked at him. Not well, he said. And the supplies here are not the same as a Velsethara market. But I've been doing field cooking for 14 months, and I've learned some things about making rations taste like something that was cared about, even slightly. She was still looking at him. If you'd like, he said. I would, she said. He made dinner that night in the small utility station at the back of the supply area. Nothing extraordinary. A combination of protein ration and dried aromatics from the trade supply, cooked low and slow in a way that changed the texture from institutional to something approaching actual food. She sat on the supply cabinet and watched him cook, which nobody had done before in 14 months because nobody had been invited to. And she asked questions about the process with the methodical curiosity she applied to every system she encountered, and he answered them. And outside the generator hummed and the sky had its orange tinge, and it was, Ethan thought, one of the better evenings he'd had in a long time. She ate with the attention she applied to things she was doing properly. It's good, she said. It's passable, he said. The dried aromatics are from a Doreth trade kit. They're not what I'd choose. It's good, she said again, without modifying the assessment. He let it stand. In the second month, 3 things happened. The first was that Sarevith's intake restructuring caught a systematic error in how the post was categorizing recurring patients, which had been causing the resupply algorithm to underorder for 2 specific medication types for the better part of a year. The correction, once made, meant a consistent supply buffer that had not previously existed. Ethan wrote a post-wide procedural note about it, and the post coordinator from the regional hub sent a message asking who had caught it. He replied with her name. The second was that one of the transit aid organizations came through on their quarterly assessment, and the assessor, a thorough Dorath woman with reading glasses and a climate-controlled flask, spent an hour with Sarevith going over the new intake categorization system and left with several pages of notes, including, Rolla told him later, a comment about wanting to know if this was replicable at other corridor-adjacent posts. The third was smaller. On a Wednesday evening when the tent was quiet, Sarevith came to the patient area where Ethan was restocking the cabinet, not during rounds, not for any formal reason, and stood for a moment in the entrance. "I wanted to ask you," she said, "about the pediatric nutrition records. I found a gap in how we're tracking supplemental caloric intake against the basic ration. I think if we adjust the flagging threshold." "Tomorrow," he said, "work is finished for tonight." She paused. "Are you certain?" "Rolla said the same thing to me an hour ago. I'm telling you the same thing she told me." He closed the cabinet. "The work will be there in the morning." She considered this. "What do you do," she said carefully, "when work is finished for the night?" It was the question of someone who had, for a very long time, used work as the only available alternative to thinking. "I have coffee," he said. "I sit with the generator running and I don't think about anything for approximately 20 minutes and then I go to sleep." He paused. "You could do the same if you want. The not thinking part takes some practice." A long pause. "I'm not very good at not thinking," she said. "I know I'm not either." He moved toward the tent entrance. "Come on, I have a reserve tin that's been waiting for a legitimate occasion." On the first night of her 3rd month, she found him at the generator shed. He went there sometimes, not to check on the generator, but because it was the one place on the post with a clear view of the sky through the vent gap in the overhead sheeting, which was not a sky he would have chosen, this far into the corridor, with its 2-moon pull and the faint orange tinge of the Kethani drift on the horizon, but it was the sky that was there, and he had learned to find something in it. She stood beside him and looked up at the same vent gap. "Velmeth," she said after a while. He looked at her. She nodded toward the sky, toward a cluster of lights on the southern edge of the frame. "That grouping, Velsethara star, my home planet, is in its system." She was quiet for a moment. "I used to be able to see it from the roof of the records building. Not this clearly, it was a city, there was always too much light, but it was there." A pause. "I look for it when I go outside at night. I don't know why. I know the planet is still there." "Maybe it's not about the planet," he said. "Maybe it's about the roof." She looked at him. "The roof where you knew what you were doing," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I think that's it." "What was it like," he asked, "before?" She told him. Not about the fall of the system. She told him that already, in the flat factual register, but about before. The records building with its 6 floors and the afternoon light on the upper level, and the way the city noise filtered up differently at different times of year. The colleagues she'd had, one in particular, an older Velsethara man who'd been a records keeper for 40 years, and who had a particular way of organizing cross-reference files that she had never fully agreed with but had come to find oddly comforting. The walk to work. The feeling of a filing system that made sense. She talked about it for a long time, and Ethan listened without filling the silences, which was the thing he could do that he knew was worth something. When she finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you," she said, "for asking. Thank you for telling me." She was looking at the sky again. The markings along her jaw were fully luminous, not the bright, alert quality of concentration, but something warmer and slower, which he'd seen a few times, and which his notes had flagged as the Velsethara response to something in the category of asterisk piece. "I didn't think I would say those things again," she said. She stopped. "Not the way I just said them, like they still existed." "They do," he said. "They're still yours." She looked at him. The expression on her face was the one he'd started to recognize over these months. The expression of someone encountering something, and not yet having the right category for it, holding it at arm's length not because it was unwanted, but because it was unfamiliar in a specific and important way, the way something is unfamiliar when it turns out to be better than you had allowed yourself to expect. "Ethan," she said. She'd started using his name in the second month, which he'd noticed and not remarked on. "Yeah," he said. "I want to say something," she said, "and I'm not entirely certain how to say it correctly, so I'll try to be accurate." "Go ahead," he said. "When I came to this post," she said carefully, "I believed with some certainty that I had used up what I had. That I was past the point where I was going to be anything to anyone, including myself." She paused. "I was not pretending when I said what I said that night. I meant it." "I know," he said. "And I want you to understand," she said, "that the reason I'm standing here right now, talking about the roof of the records building as though it still matters to me, is that you did not treat me like someone past the point of mattering." She held his gaze. "You treated me like someone who was worth treating carefully, worth feeding, worth asking where she was going." Her voice was steady but not without effort. "You gave me work not as charity but as something you actually needed. You asked me what I was good at. You told me that I was tired, not finished." A pause. "Those things, they didn't just help me. They were the difference. I want you to know that." The generator hummed. The sky had the orange tinge of the drift on the south edge. "You did the work," he said. "Everything you've built here, you built it. I gave you a table to build on." "That table," she said quietly, "was everything." He looked at her, this person, with her luminous markings and her silver-pale skin and her 2 months of supply reconciliations and 12 pages of intake system notes, and a legal pad full of her own small script, standing in a generator shed looking up at the star her home planet orbited. And he thought that he did not have a category for what this felt like either. And that was, on balance, a very good thing. "We have coffee," he said. "Are you?" "Yes," she said, before he finished the question. On the last day of her 6th month, she did not leave. She renewed the posting. She put in the paperwork herself, on the same terminal where she'd restructured the intake system, on a Tuesday afternoon when the post was quiet. She told him about it afterward, in the same careful way she told him things, not asking, not requiring anything from him in response, just offering the information as something that existed. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "The Kael'veth track would have." "I know," she said again. She was not looking away from him the way she had looked away in the first weeks. She'd mostly stopped doing that. "I want to be here. The work is here." A pause. "You're here." He held her gaze. "Sariveth," he said. "I know it's not conventional," she said, which was the understatement of the corridor, given that they were a human medic and a Velsethara records administrator in a field tent in a contested border region. "I know I know the situation is not standard. I'm not expecting." She stopped, started again. "I'm not saying this in order to create an obligation. I'm saying it because I have spent a very long time not saying the things that were true, and I'm trying to stop doing that." He was quiet for a moment. "You're here because the work is here," he said. "Yes." "And because I'm here." "Yes." "Is there an order to those things?" She looked at him. "They're not separate," she said. He nodded slowly. The generator hummed. Somewhere in the main tent, Rolla was doing morning rounds with the particular efficient footstep that Ethan could identify from any corner of the post. "I don't know what this is yet," he said honestly. I'm not someone who, he stopped himself, because what he'd been about to say was pretends to know what something is before it is fully what it is, which was maybe the thing that was most true about him and also extremely hard to say out loud. But I know what you mean. When you say the work and me are not separate, I know what you mean. Her markings brightened. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. The months after that were not a single thing. They were many small things, which was, Ethan had come to believe over a long time working in places where the large things were almost entirely outside anyone's control, how the meaningful things usually went. There was the morning she came to him with a cross-referenced report on Velsithara family reunion requests, and there were 43 more families on it than had been on the previous quarter's report, and she told him about it in the flat, accurate voice, and then sat down very suddenly in the chair beside his desk and put her face in her hands, not crying, or not quite, the Velsithara equivalent being a compression of the markings into a dense, dark luminous pattern. And he sat beside her and didn't say anything, just sat, until the markings eased. There was the Tuesday in the 4th month when she walked out of the data station in the middle of the afternoon with her legal pad, and sat in the sun outside the tent entrance for 30 minutes, which she had never done before. And when he found her there, she said I needed to stop looking at the screen, and he said good and sat beside her, and they didn't talk about anything at all. There was the night of the resupply verification, when they were both awake at 200 going through manifests, and she reached across the table for the carafe and refilled his mug without asking, which was such a small thing, and was not a small thing at all. There was the morning she asked him, carefully, what holidays humans observed, not because she'd forgotten what holidays were, but because she wanted to know which ones he observed, specifically. And when she found out about the one in the late-year rotation, she spent a week planning something that involved the post's entire ration reserve of something approximately like chocolate, and 3 separate notes passed to Rolla about timing. And on the evening in question, there was food and the generator shed and the sky, and she said, I have never planned something for someone before, in the tone of someone reporting a discovery. And he said, asterisk, how was it? And she said, I would like to do it again. And there was the night, much later, when she said his name in the dark in the particular way of someone who has finally arrived somewhere they were not sure they would arrive. And there is no need to go further than that, because what happens after that is theirs. He wrote to his sister, back in the core systems, on a slow Sunday morning, with the tent quiet and Saravith at the data station, doing the thing she did where she organized the week's records in advance because it made the week go better. She told me, the first night she was here, that she was scared and worthless, he wrote. She said it like a fact, like something established. She'd been telling herself that for so long she'd started to think it was the weather, just the condition things existed in. I've been thinking about why people do that. I think it's because when things are very bad for a very long time, you start to need an explanation. And I am the kind of person things go badly for, is an explanation that requires nothing outside yourself. It closes the question. It's terrible, but it's closed. The problem is it's not true. It's almost never true. She built a resource allocation system for this post that will outlast both of us. She found 43 families in a database that no one had looked at carefully enough. She restructured the intake records in 2 days, and I watched her do it and I thought, this is what a person looks like when they're doing the thing they were made to do. The word she used was worthless. I keep thinking about that word. I think it means unable to be seen at the correct value. And I think the correction, when it works, when it actually works, is not you telling someone what their value is. It's you giving them a place to do the thing they do and stepping back and letting them see it themselves. She did the work, I gave her a place to do it. She'd disagree with me about that. She'd say I gave her the table. Maybe we're both right. He stopped writing and looked across the tent at her. She was at the terminal with her legal pad, the small, dense handwriting, the markings luminous in the morning light, the posture of someone who was not folded inward anymore but simply upright and present and doing the work. She looked up, sensing the attention the way she often did, Velsethara empathic sense, reading the room, reading him, and met his eyes. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The markings brightened once briefly, and she looked back at her work. He looked back at the screen. "She's not scared now," he wrote. "Or she is, sometimes, she tells me when she is, because she decided to stop carrying that in silence. But she's not worthless. She never was. She just needed someone to see that clearly enough and hold it steadily enough that eventually she could see it too. I don't think that's extraordinary. I think it's just what people owe each other. I think I needed it too at some point, and I hope someone gave it to me. I don't always remember clearly enough to be sure, but I think someone did." He sent the message. Outside, the generator hummed. The 2 moons of Kappa 7 were below the horizon. The Kethani drift lit the sky in a faint, persistent orange that had long since stopped being strange, and had become simply the color of the place where they were, which was enough. End.